Hi, welcome to another gardening video. It's about mid-June right now, and you've probably been busy putting on all your annuals, or maybe you love doing up containers at your front door. You have some nice showy pots there, or some on your patio deck, or maybe you're in an apartment and have a balcony that you decorate up with container plants. A lot of us will move our house plants out for the summer as well and give them some fresh air. So you probably thought, oh, I've got all my jobs done up, the garden's ready to go, the balcony is looking great. But there are some things that you can continue doing just to keep your container plants looking great for the summer, keeping them healthy and keeping them blooming all summer long. One of the first things you can be doing is monitoring your plants for insects and diseases. And it's quite common to see some insect problems on your plants. But first thing to recognize is not all insects are bad. Some insects just come by, chew a few holes in the leaves, and then they've moved on. And so you're not really too worried about those ones. They've done some damage. You could always pick off leaves that look too unsightly, but usually not a problem as far as trying to control it. The insects that we have more problems with are more the aphids and the mealybugs, whitefly, thrips, and they're more sucking insects. So they usually tap into the vein on the backside of the leaf and take juice out of the leaf itself. So you might see the leaf kind of curled or a bit distorted looking, or you might be seeing yellow spots appearing on the leaf, or maybe the whole leaf is turned yellow. And so those ones you do want to get in control of before they do too much damage to your plants. But one of the easiest ways to control an insect problem is to be monitoring on a regular basis. Don't wait till you see all the leaves starting to yellow on your plants and wonder what's going on. It is better to check them weekly and just look a bit closer than you normally would as you're watering the plants or that. And just see, are you seeing any damage? Are you seeing leaves that look a little puckered looking? Or you're seeing yellow spotting in the leaf? And make sure you're turning the leaf over when you're inspecting for insects. A lot of them do live on the underside of the leaf as well. Sometimes the insect problems will get ahead of us. Maybe you have a lot of aphids right on the tip growth. That's usually where they seem to collect in that. And you do need to resort to spraying them to get them under control. It's always best to stay organic if you can. So something like insecticidal soap is a nice organic product, not too strong, but strong enough for the small insects that we're talking about. And you have to remember that once you spray, you shouldn't be spraying in the heat of the day, first of all. If it's over 25 degrees, you should wait till either into the evening or early morning before it gets too warm, or a bit cooler, overcast day to spray. But once you spray, you have to remember that most of the eggs that were laid when the insect was still alive will hatch within a 10 to 14 day period. So it is best to repeat that spray if you need to, about 10, 14 days later to get the next generation of insects. Also be monitoring at the same time for any disease problems. On tropical plants or on annuals, a lot of the ones I will see is either powdery mildew, which presents itself as a white film on the leaves that can be kind of wiped off with your fingers. There's different fungal spots. Black spot is one of the most common ones. Or stuff like rust, where you see orange spores on the underside of leaves. And again, if you're monitoring on a regular basis, you can get ahead of them without doing much spraying. So just even pinching off leaves that you see that have a disease problem, and make sure you're throwing them away, not composting them. But just pinching off infected areas. Again, if it's kind of out of control and it's taken over a lot of the plants, you may want to consider just an organic fungicide. There's one by Safers as well called garden fungicide. That would work on there. Again, don't be spraying if it's over 25 degrees because the sprays can do some damage if the leaf is too hot. So just be always monitoring. As you're watering the plants, don't let a problem get too far ahead of you, but always be checking and saying, is there something here that I need to be concerned about? And the easiest way is just pinching off the few leaves that are infected and keep ahead of it that way. Another thing that you can be monitoring for is the watering. And quite often we see a plant wilt. The first thing that we always think is that the plant needs water. But if you water your plants, it's wilted, you give it some water and it doesn't perk up. The problem actually can be overwatering. It will also present itself by wilting if there's too much water. So make sure your pots are draining well. If your containers are sitting right onto a brick surface or a wood surface of a deck, it might be that the water can't drain from the pot. So you can actually just put a few bricks or pieces of wood underneath the pot just to lift it off that surface to see if that improves your drainage. Or definitely if you have a container sitting in a decorative pot that has no drainage holes, you need to be lifting out that insert when watering the plant once it's lifted out, and then putting it back in, so it's not sitting in a pot full of water. So make sure that you're monitoring your water. Is it too much? Is it too little? I always find it's best to water first thing in the morning. Then your plants aren't suffering all day long in the heat. They have that moisture right there ready. If you wait till the evening, then that plant has a greater chance of drying out in the heat of the day. So I always water the containers first thing in the morning, and make sure that you're watering right down at the container itself, right at the soil level. If you're always watering your flowers and spraying the foliage, you will get more disease problems forming on your plants. And also the flowers don't last as long. So I like to get the nozzle right down at the pots, right at the soil, and make sure you're watering so the water drains out the bottom. And once it's draining out the bottom, you know that it's had a good soak into there. But definitely if your plant doesn't perk up after watering, then start feeling in the soil and seeing if it is too wet. So make sure you're monitoring. It's hard to say how often it needs. It's whether it's in sun or shade. In a sunny spot, windy spot, it's going to need more watering than a shady spot. A larger pot will need less watering, less often watering than a small pot that's going to dry out quicker. So it really depends on where that pot is. So you just have to monitor on a regular basis and see how often does that plant need actual watering. The next thing you can be doing is fertilizing your plants. And because plants in containers are watered more often, usually on a daily basis or every other day out in the sun, then the nutrients are leaching through the soil much quicker. And so that all the nitrogen, phosphorus, all those nutrients aren't staying in the soil as long. So it is good to be replenishing the fertilizer in the container. And again, going organic is always preferred. And a lot of the organic fertilizers are actually slower release. If you're using a fertilizer that you dilute in water, it feeds the plant very quickly, but then it leaches through very quickly as well, so you have to fertilize more often. Organic fertilizers are slower to release. Usually they have to break down and dissolve first, but because they're slower, they also last longer. It feeds for a longer period of time. So using a good organic fertilizer, if you have a flowering plant, it's best to go with a high middle number, high phosphorus, and that'll help promote blooms and that for you. If it's more of a leafy tropical, just a regular all-purpose fertilizer would be fine to be using in them. But make sure that you are feeding your plants during the summer months. The next thing you can be doing just to improve your containers for the summer is what we call deadheading. And deadheading is removing the spent flowers. If you have more annuals and heavy bloomers, removing the spent flowers. So once the flower is finished and starting to fade, it is best to pinch the bloom off. And we're not just pinching off the petals of the flower, but we're following that flower stalk down to where it meets the other part of the plants. And why we deadhead is that a plant knows that once it's done bloom, that little seed head that's left on there, the plant knows that it's set to go. So if you leave the seed head on, the plant will actually stop flowering because a plant's goal is to reproduce itself. So if it's flowered and set seed, then it knows it doesn't need to bloom anymore. So by removing that spent flower and the seed head, so following that flower stalk right down to where it meets the plant, it's actually the plant knows that it doesn't have a seed head. And so it'll keep repeat blooming because its goal is to reproduce itself. And so you can keep a plant blooming much longer and much more vigorously if you can be deadheading as soon as the flowers are spent. So it might be once a week just going in there, whether it's petunias, geraniums, whatever it is, and just removing those spent flower stalks. But make sure you're not just pulling the petals off the top and leaving the stalk there. Usually the flower stalks will turn brown and it just becomes unsightly. So it's a good way to clean up your plants, but it's also a good way to be keeping them going for the summer. Some of the annuals in that as well will need pinching back. And by pinching back, sometimes, especially some of the trailing ones, whether it's a trailing petunia, some like the copa, the lobelia and that as well, are ones that midsummer they start looking leggy, especially if they're not getting the sun that they require. And so sometimes if the plant is just looking tired, sometimes just cutting the plant back part way will actually invigorate it. It'll force it to produce more growth. And with that new growth, it's also going to help it flower more, because with that, the new leaves come new buds. So if your plant is starting to look tired during the summer, don't be afraid to cut it back a little bit if it's in the containers or in a hanging basket, and just have it rejuvenated. Good time to fertilize again, and just have the plants continue. If you let it kind of go leggy in that, it's kind of going to stop for the summer. But giving it a good haircut will actually invigorate it and keep it going all summer for you. So these are just a few handy hits to keep your containers looking nice for the summer, to keep them from problems and just getting overtaken by insects or diseases, and just make it more enjoyable for the summer. So I hope this helps you out, and happy container gardening.